Welcome to the Father Alchemist. This is a show about karma, surrender, and transformation. It doesn't matter what you're struggling with. It could be motivation, money, vices of any kind, drugs, alcohol, porn, shopping, food, your health and fitness, family and kids, spirituality, your business, career, anything mind, body, spirit. The Father Alchemist is a show that will help you transmute and use all that pain to create the gold version of you, the best version of you. We're bringing in some of the top minds to give you a different perspective, to make you think, and most importantly, to help you change from the inside out and the outside in. The goal of the show is to give you support in your journey to becoming the best you in all areas of your life, so you can be proud of the individual you are and not held from being the greatest version of yourself. Please follow me at The Father Alchemist on Instagram and follow the show on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. If this show gives you value, a fresh perspective, if it makes you laugh or makes you think differently, please rate the show on your favorite podcast app, share it, like it, and subscribe. Your support means the world to me. Now let's make some magic happen.
A lot of people where I'm from don't make it out. I know that I'm blessed. It's a few L's and millions, so turn that loss to a check.
For those of you that don't know Julia Purrington, she is an amazing mother, an amazing leader, incredible in her community, phenomenal real estate agent. I've known you now for how many years? I mean, it's probably like
7 or 8.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years. Do you remember how we met?
I met you in the running shop.
We met in the running shop. So Julia's into outdoor sports. I'll let her tell her story a little bit. But yeah, we met at a running shop in Golden.
Yep.
I was up there, I don't know, I was always buying something from that shop. And anyway, we ran into each other and realized that we both knew Marissa, right?
Well, I think so. I think you figured out that I was in real estate. And Marissa's mom is the one that owns the shop.
Right.
Yeah. And she actually said, "Oh, you're in real estate. He's a lender. You should chat."
Yeah. You know, ironically, we're closing a transaction with Marissa right now.
Nice, great.
I haven't seen her in a long time, but she's gone through a lot of amazing transition herself. So, but for those that don't know who you are, why don't you tell everybody who you are and a little bit about you?
So I'm Julia Purrington. I am a licensed structural engineer. I retired that career 10 years ago now. I've been in real estate for 10 years. I live in Evergreen. I've lived in either Evergreen, Conifer, Pine. I've lived up in the foothills for almost 20 years now. No, over 20 years now. In 2000.
Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from outside of Boston, an hour south of Boston, New Bedford. It's used to be like the whaling capital of the world. It's a little fishing port town. But I can go into the park in my car and have a dad if you want.
That's amazing. I don't think I've ever heard that voice. So did you grow up fishing? Like, did your dad show you that stuff?
No, it was a fishing town. My dad was an attorney. So I kind of grew up, I was a lifeguard. I was on the swim team. I mean, when I was 5 years old, my mom put me and my older sister, both of us, on the swim team. And that was my sport through high school and even through part of college. So I was a lifeguard at the beach, and I always worked down by the water, but not huge fishing family. We also sailed catamarans. My dad had a Bobby cat, so we used to do that a little bit, little water skiing. It was a lot of fun. It was just a way for me. I think it was more about getting out and doing something with my dad. In the winters, we were ski buddies, and in the summer, we would go sailing.
Very cool. Is there good skiing in Boston?
No, we had to drive either, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire.
Okay, got it.
But we did. My dad grew up skiing. He actually went to boarding school in Canada, so he was on the ski team. And that's how I ended up out here in the long run. But yeah.
Really? Because what, he would just bring you guys out here to ski?
No, he never brought us as a family out here to ski. He always took us up to Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire. Weekends. I was the child he would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning because I was the one that always wanted to go. And it was like a 3-hour drive, so we'd have to get up early and go. And when I was a senior in college, he was like, "Hey, do you want to go skiing in Colorado?" And I was like, yeah, like I had never been west of the Mississippi. Like this was it.
Wow.
So we came out here. I can't even remember if it was my Christmas break or spring break. But it was my senior year, and I was going to be graduating, and I told my dad, we were getting back on the plane to go home, and I said, I'm going to move here when I graduate. And he was like, yeah, right.
And you did?
I did.
Wow.
I moved here right after graduation.
So you just loved it?
I loved the skiing. I loved the mountains, right? I grew up on the beach. I grew up on the water. People are like, don't you miss that? I have come to learn. I appreciate the beach, but I'm a mountain girl. I really am.
See, I think I'm the opposite. Like, I'm here in a mountain town, and I just we just got back from Santa Barbara, and it was, I don't know, it's just amazing for me to be in the water. I love the water. I miss it. I probably spend more time near the water now, though, that I live here, ironically,
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, interesting.
Well, at least for me, I think I just would take it for granted, you know? Like, I lived there. It was so close. Why bother going? And also, this was at a time in my life where, I was entering my career, right? So I was very focused on work and making money, and that's a whole other story about Los Angeles and what it can do to a person. But but I love it here too. I mean, it's an amazing place to be, and I think it's a gem of a place, and there's so many options, I think, in Colorado. Yeah,
no, I agree. And there's not a ton of big water. People are like, well, aren't you going to go down to, I'm like, no, it's not the same, first of all.
Sure.
But it like I said, I have come to realize that I am a mountain girl. Even when I was a kid growing up, while I was a lifeguard on the beach, it was the hiking in the middle of the, in the summer, and the winter ski trips with my dad. And once we came out here, it was, and it was just always kind of a dream for me, right? I'm going to go west. And maybe the first part of the dream, there was a time when I first moved here where I thought, this is a stop on my way to California. My older sister, I had been here maybe a year. My older sister moved to San Francisco, and she drove, and I drove from Colorado to San Francisco with her. And I thought maybe I would, nope. I did. Yeah. So it's,
you think you'll ever go to California?
Permanently, like to move there permanently? I doubt it. I mean, there's a chance. You never know, right? I've got two boys that are kind of in flux in what they're going to do. They're both, one of them's graduated from college, the other one's still in college. So could I live there? Probably, but I would need to be close enough to the mountains where I could have both worlds, I think. But my older sister's out there. There's also just a lot of draw to family right now. My parents have 4 kids, one in each time zone. Where like,
is that right?
Yeah, we've got Boston, Kansas City, Colorado, and San Francisco. So, but yeah.
It sounds like you were really close with your dad.
I was really close with my dad. So when he brought me out here and I moved out here, he also had a group of friends that, I don't know if this started before I moved out here or after, but one of his close friends from after college has a big home in Telluride, and they would do these ski reunion trips. So he would come out, and they would all bring their sons, and then the daughter, right? So so he would come out and have ski weekends with me. My mom doesn't love the altitude; she doesn't love skiing, so it was kind of our thing. It was kind of the thing I did with my dad, and I to this day am an avid skier, and it really does give me some connection to my dad. He passed away a little over a year ago. So it gives me a little more purpose now when I'm out there. Yeah.
What kind of an attorney was he?
He was a personal injury attorney.
Oh, was he?
He really, he was. It's funny. It's funny that you say that. He did also do a lot of estate planning law and that kind of stuff. But his business. So if anybody ever grew up around New Bedford, Massachusetts, or they also had an office in Providence, it's funny, but sometimes it's like, oh yeah, Hamill, Waxler, Allen, and Collins. My maiden name is Hamill. That was my dad's law firm. So it's funny, but when I meet people out here that say they're from the area, I'm like, oh yeah, Hamill, Waxler, and they're, oh, I'm like, yeah, that's my dad.
Still there?
Funny enough, there was still an office in Providence. The office in New Bedford shut down a while ago, but the building that they were in was kind of an iconic building. Last time I checked, the sign was still there that had, somebody else owns it and operates a different business, but the law firm sign was still on the building.
Oh, wow.
So last time I was back home, so to speak. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up having a dad that was an attorney? Like, because to be an attorney, there's a big educational component to it, but then there's also, I think a lot of people think like, oh, you have a degree in anything, and now you're successful because of the degree. And I think that's not the case. You know, you almost have to be an entrepreneur if you're starting a practice as an attorney. And so, so growing up as a daughter to a father with 3 other siblings and somebody that's trying to balance family with, you know, building a business, what was that like?
Well, and not only that, my dad was, yes, definitely businessman, owned the law firm. But my mom also worked, but back and forth between part-time and full-time, depending on how little the kids were, right? Like she went back full-time for a little while, and then she had my older sister and I, and then she went back full-time, and then had my younger brother and sister, and then went back part-time. But
did she work in the law firm?
No, so she is, my mom graduated from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, as part of the first class to graduate women.
No kidding.
With a degree in computer science.
What?
And then she moved to New York City and worked for RCA. So she was the systems administrator.
Okay.
So she was I think when she retired, she was the vice chancellor of systems operations at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. When I was a kid growing up, it was SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, but it was renamed to be part of the UMass system, so UMass Dartmouth. But that she worked there for, I think, 40 years when she retired. So, yeah. So she's, you know, I had 2 parents who were both educated and driven in their careers. And, my mom's maybe took a back seat. It was that little more traditional family like that. But they were both... it was unspoken expectations in my house. Like I never understood until I had children. I'm like, God, my parents have 4 pretty happy, successful children. Maybe I should figure out what they did. Right?
No kidding. And when your dad passed, how many years did your parents spend together?
So they had just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Wow. Yeah. So it was, they had been married 50 years.
Wow. Any secrets that you learned from them? I mean, that's right.
I wish I could have. I think you probably know this, but I am divorced, so I clearly didn't get the full end of the secrets there. And I have a great relationship with my ex-husband, and our boys are both, as far as I'm concerned, happy and thriving, I think. But so the secret is I think they really always made time for each other, and you know, as busy as they both were, they were present for each other and respected each other's need for, like, my dad to come out here and come skiing with me. It was just so
how cool.
Wow,
50 years. You don't hear stories like that
much
anymore.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Was there a lot of emphasis on education as you were growing up, or was it more of like, find your own path and we'll support it?
No. Again, I don't remember my parents being like, you have to do this. I mean, I remember bringing home a C in penmanship, and I went to after school classes for the next month, and then I took a typing class that summer. But you know,
there goes the penmanship.
Right. Yeah. Like it was, so there was an expectation, like, and I'll tell you, Derek, I tell people this all the time, right? I have 3 siblings. I'm the only one that didn't graduate valedictorian or salutatorian of the high school class, whatever that second word is again. Salutatorian, is that right?
Salutatorian.
Yeah.
I don't know. I dropped out of college.
Right. So of the high school class, like I'm the only one that didn't graduate with, you know, top 1 or 2 in my high school class. I'm the only one that didn't go to Harvard.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's right. It was just an expectation in my family, and it wasn't until later that I realized that's not normal.
No.
Right. And neither one of my kids went to either any of those prestigious schools. So
talk about a financial commitment from your parents.
Right.
Holy cow.
And I went to Duke, so it wasn't much less expensive than Harvard. No. And considering it was further away, it probably the all-in bill. Yeah, they really did right by us. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So it was, but it was never even an option in my head. And not that I struggled with it, but I certainly it didn't come as easily to me as it did to my siblings.
Smart family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you came out here.
Yep.
And Wait, what did you so what did you get your degree in?
So I graduated from the School of Engineering with a degree in civil and environmental engineering.
Okay.
With an emphasis on structural engineering and a certificate in architecture. So
Wow. So, and you actually used your degree for the work you went into,
when I first moved out here, I applied to a bunch
which is rare.
Yeah. So I applied, but at that time, right, it was 1997.
Okay.
Engineering was a great field to be in, especially if you were a woman. And coming to Colorado, what I realized was all the other applicants, they were looking at you are either going to be CU, CSU, or School of Mines, right? So I got an interview with everybody I sent my resume to because my resume didn't say those three schools. It said Duke, right? Not that it's a better school than School of Mines or whatever, but it's different. Right?
Sure.
And I'm a woman, and there just weren't many women applying for those jobs. So, so I got a job pretty quickly in a more civil-oriented firm, and I stayed there for a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, and that's where I met my first husband. Yeah, and then I moved over to structural.
He was an engineer as well?
He's an engineer. Okay. He's a civil engineer. Yep.
Okay. How did you like it doing that work?
The civil work I didn't love as much. It was a little bit boring. I mean, I'll tell you, like when I entered the firm, they were doing like utility design and that kind of stuff, right? So, you know what the low man on the totem pole in a job like that gets to do?
What's that?
You get to watch sewer videos. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Wow. And you mark like where yeah. So that was not fun for me. But for me, the interesting part really was the construction piece and the putting something together. And, sure. So then I worked for a firm for several years that was doing a lot of commercial construction, light commercial construction. So it was great. I mean, I enjoyed it, the time that I was in it. When I had my second child, I had actually, after one kid, I had switched to a different engineering firm that was doing mostly residential construction. Okay. And I was managing multifamily residential and single family residential projects. But I also then had a second child, and all of a sudden I'm like, I went back to work literally like 3 weeks after my second son was born, and it was a workaholic job. And they wanted me to move to their Philadelphia office, and I gave them a number and said, this is what it has to be. And
they said no.
they said, yeah, we're not going to give you that. So, I left a bad taste in my mouth. So I left that firm and said, I'm just going to work from home and do some consulting on the side.
I want to stay on that just for a second, because you bring up something that I think happens to all of us, which is we're in this situation, and we're setting expectations for ourselves, or we have a desired outcome, and that outcome never comes to fruition. Yeah. And oftentimes it's once you get through that transition, you have a new perspective, and it ultimately ends up becoming a blessing in disguise. And it sounds like it was a blessing in disguise for you.
Yeah, it probably was. Like, I try to imagine my life if I had moved to Philadelphia.
Right.
Like, I don't think I would be happy.
We would have never met.
Right. We would have never met. Correct. And at that time in my life, right, I had also kind of not stopped, but I was working a ton. I was commuting quite far to work, and I had these two young kids that were going to daycare, and I was like, forget this. And I wasn't taking care of myself as well as I probably could have. It was around that same time, I was going to just do some consulting on the side. That was my intention, right? My husband still had a full-time job. We were great. It was probably around that same time, maybe a year later, when my brother-in-law, who also went to high school with me, so like also just high school friend, looked at me and he goes, wow, Julie, like my friends at home call me Julie, never Julia. Okay. And so he's like, Julie, you've like all of a sudden become this, like, in my head, he said chubby mom. In his head, he swears those aren't the words that came out. But I was like, oh, like, I'm not the athlete. And he had said, he's like, you were such an athlete when we were in high school. And when you were like, I'm like, oh. So that's when I also like took that time. I was like, no, I got to do something for myself here. I'm going to spend more time with my kids at home. I'm going to work from home. I'm going to buy a road bike, and I was already a swimmer, I told you, and I'm going to figure out how to run, and I'm going to do a triathlon. So I yeah.
I think you just gave somebody the keys on how to motivate you.
Tell me I'm fat. That's like body image problems all over the place.
But it's amazing though, right? Because somebody can compliment. I mean, this goes for anybody, but they can compliment you all day long. The second they critique you, that's what you remember, and that's oftentimes what triggers movement or a reaction or a change. I think in a lot of us, right? So it's funny to me how like that's what you remember, and as a result, that caused this ripple effect that led you in this path where, I mean, you're like, when I think of you, I think of more or less a professional athlete. Like I think of that. I think of a woman who's incredibly smart, that is successful, that's done a lot of amazing things with her life. And so I'm just fascinated by anybody that's got that type of story. But you took that and you ran with it, and so then you started doing these races and events. Talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, so the first,
because that's kind of how we met at the running store, right?
Yeah. So it started with triathlons, because I knew I needed. My brother-in-law was an avid road cyclist. He was on a cycling team, and he was like, "I can get you a discount on a road bike." Like, great, but if I don't sign up for something. Right, I knew myself. I better sign up for a race, or I won't use this road bike. Right, it's going to sit in my garage.
Like a forced commitment.
Right. So I got myself on a training plan, and I started. I did the race I wanted to do. I just started looking online at triathlons, and I wanted to do this Escape from Alcatraz triathlon. Right. And then I found out you have to either get in from a lottery, which. Then it was like impossible to get in the lottery.
Was that legit? Or you have to qualify. Like you're doing the swimming in the
so San Francisco they take Bay. A boat out to Alcatraz. You jump off the boat and swim in.
Is that still going on, this race?
I am doing it this year, as a matter of fact.
Oh my God. Okay, keep going.
I'll get there.
Yeah.
So at the time, the lottery was not easy to get into. But so you swim from Alcatraz, you bike around the Presidio and down on Ocean Beach. And I was just like, oh, this looks like a really cool race.
Totally.
My sister was living in San Francisco. I'm like, oh, this is it for me, right? I'm going to do. But the other way to get in is to qualify. So I signed up for a qualifying race, and I didn't get the first one. I signed up for another qualifying race, and I got a spot for Alcatraz. So I started obsessively racing, right? Then I'm doing like the Boulder Peak, and I'm going from like, I had never run to, okay, I can do a 5K. I can do a 10K. I can do 8 miles. The Alcatraz one, the run is 8 miles, which is longer than a normal Olympic distance triathlon. I'm like, oh, well, I can run a half marathon. I can run a marathon. Like I did the Boston Marathon. I did an Ironman triathlon. Like
How about qualifying? I mean, the Boston Marathon, that's like, I mean, that's not for just novices, right?
Yeah.
Like you got to qualify. You got to be fast.
Yeah. And again, it was like the family thing, right? My sister helped me do that. My younger sister, I think had already qualified. We went down to run a race in Arizona. She ran the half marathon and I ran the full. And I was like, I'm going to qualify for Boston. And I'm coming around the last couple of miles. She had finished her half marathon a long time before, right? And I see her, I'm like maybe a little more than a mile away from the finish line. And I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, I am just missing this. Like, I am not going to qualify. And she starts running with me. And I was like, Ann, I can't do it. I can't run any faster. I'm going to miss those. She goes, no, you have until 3 hours and 40 minutes and 59 seconds. She's like, they give you that 59. I don't think they do anymore, but back then they did. Wow. So it was because of her, and she just ran along with me. She's like, you can do it, you can do it. It's just like a 9-minute mile this last, and I did it. And so we ran the Boston Marathon together that year.
Wow, that's such a cool story. Like,
yeah,
to me, that's a story about mindset. It's a story about accountability, right? Like even you making the commitment to run the race before you had maybe done the training or had looked into all the details. You just said, I know myself, I've got to schedule the thing and then I'll figure out the how. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then having a family member there, is that something that you've been aware of? For yourself, like where, you know, accountability and maybe having a coach even in business? Yeah.
I mean, I've always, the first triathlon I did, I think I just downloaded a training plan, but after that I hired a coach. Mm-hmm. Like I get it. I grew up on the swim team, right? And in doing all those triathlons, like I was qualified to get my pro license. I never quite ended up doing it, but I was at that level where it was very fun, but I'm very competitive, right? So with my like, oh, I want to run this Boston Marathon with my sister. Yeah, it was a lot about the family and a lot about, but I was also about so I can beat her, right? Like we're competitive. It's how the family is, and it's how. So yeah, I think a lot of it, but I did recognize the need for a coach, right? I knew the only way I was going to make these, I knew they were tough goals that I was setting. Wasn't like I'm going, oh, I'm just going to go and run a 6-hour marathon. That's an accomplishment for anyone. But to get up and say, I'm going to run a 3-hour, my very first marathon was a 3-hour, that was my very first marathon I qualified for Boston. So it was, you know, you have to prepare for it, you plan for it. And yeah, sometimes you reverse engineer it to get there. But yeah, it's always, I think there's always has to be a bigger picture and a bigger goal for me in mind. And then I can set the other goals to get there.
Do you feel like your life has had these two segments where it's like one side is career woman business, being successful, and then the other side is you're pulled by this sort of athletic desire, or have those two worlds collided or intermingled, and where you've seen how they've helped each other out?
So I spent a little bit of time doing both. So during my triathlon career, I think I've shared this story with you. I was training for the World Championship race in Australia. I was going to do the Olympic level or the Olympic distance triathlon with Team USA, not with their pro team, but with their amateur team. They take a couple people from every age group to these World Championship races.
It's not kangaroos.
Right. But I was going to get to go to Australia to do this race, and I was training for the race. There's a group of 5 of us out riding bikes, and we were in a car accident. 2 of us were hit by a car. I don't remember anything. This story, sometimes it feels like I'm telling a story about somebody else, because I literally don't remember anything from about 2 hours before the car hit me until 2 weeks later. So I know that we swam. I have a vague memory of getting out of the water, waiting for one of my friends, getting on our bikes.
How long ago was this?
This was in 2009, so this is going to be 15 years.
So were you in the civ?
I owned my I owned my own business, and I think that helped me find the balance between having the time to train, running my own business. You know, at that point, I think my engineering firm, we had an office. So what started out as just consulting on the side, right? 3 years later became I had an office in Evergreen with 5 people. And then another couple years after that, I had an office on the Western Slope. It started in Aspen, and then we couldn't afford the rent there, so we moved down to Glenwood Springs. But you know, so we had 2 offices and 12 employees. At that point, my husband had left his civil engineering firm, and we had become kind of multidisciplinary. We were doing civil and structural. And I was in the office, like I had
he left his job
to come work. Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we owned the engineering firm together. Okay. And yeah, it was a good thing. Like, you know, I was out of the house at 5:00 every morning. He would drop the kids off at school. I would get a training session in, or I actually was coaching the Masters swim team. Right, because I'm too cheap to pay for a pass for the rec center. So if I coach the Masters swim team, I have a free pass. Yeah, like it was ridiculous, my thinking on some of this stuff. But right, but I'm up at 5:00 every morning, and then I would get my kids after, you know, pick up at 3:00, and I would get my workouts in the morning, and then maybe I would do another workout at night after I put the kids to bed. But it was, you know, my days were full. Was
you like going with the flow, or were you like super structured about it, where you were like just an extreme disciplinarian?
A little of both. You know, I think one of the things I can say in hindsight is I was really going full speed ahead, and I had goals, but I don't know that I was thoughtful about it. Or even about the balance, right? Somehow there was some balance in there. I did spend time with my kids. I did get in the work piece, and I did get in the take care of yourself piece, but I was not necessarily thoughtful about it.
Like just going through the motions, you mean?
Yeah.
Like you would develop this system that you were going through the motions on.
Yeah, but I mean, I was driven, but I don't know that I stopped to think like, yes, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. is this really who I am and what I want, right? I was setting these goals based on some inner drive or some what my mom said I should do or what.
I want to go deeper on this right here.
Yeah.
So you were when did you realize you were at this crossroads? If you think back to that time where you're like, man, I know I'm doing all these things that are, that seem to be the right path with my business and that's becoming successful and everything for my health. And, but God, is this really who I am or who I want to be or whom I'm meant to be?
Yeah. So when I got hit by the car, I was in Littleton Hospital for a week, and then they transferred me to Craig Hospital. I had a mild traumatic brain injury, and Craig Hospital only does brain and spinal cord injuries.
Okay.
Thankful for my mom, who, when I was at Littleton, I was in pieces, right? My right foot was on my left shoulder, completely dislocated my knee. I had 8 surgeries over 2 years. I was in a wheelchair for the first 6 months. And then I was on and off a walker, crutches, wheelchair for the 2 years until the end of the knee surgeries. I was not fully independently walking again for 2 years. So it was a long road, and I spent 6 weeks at Craig Hospital. And when they sent me home, I went back. At first it was 3 days a week, then twice a week, once a week. But I will tell you, for 5 years, every week or two, I would still see the psychologist that they set me up with. And he is the one, the first thing he said I needed to do to figure out how to get past this, right? I had a head injury. I had a physical injury. The 2 biggest identities of my life were taken away, right? I'm no longer smart. Well, I'm no longer able to do this. And it took a while, but there are a lot of workarounds, and I was able to, today I would say I could do any one given mental task that I could do before. I can still do it. The difference was when I would have more than one task, I would have panic attacks. So as my function started to come back, I was able to go back to work, but the thing he taught me was got to take the word should out of your vocabulary. And when you do say should, is that because that's what you believe, or because it's something society has told you, or your parents? Right. I should really take care of this first, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Who's telling you that? I should really stay in the engineering field. Who's telling me that? My parents, because they paid for my education? And are they really saying it, or am I just assuming they're saying it, right? So when you use that word should, figure out, is this just something that you really believe you ought to do, and that it is what the person that you are wants to do? Or is it because it's some unwritten expectation somewhere that you think you're following, right? And when you have a few years to kind of regroup and rethink, I was able to take a deep breath and slow down. 15 years later, I can honestly say to people, when I say, oh, I was in this car accident, they go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm don't be. It is the best thing that has ever happened to me in my life. I know that where I am right now, what I'm doing is exactly where I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to be living my life, right? I can feel the fulfillment every day. Yeah. And I think we go through life taking for granted things that maybe we shouldn't, and not understanding things that we quote unquote should do, and why we're doing them, because because you don't even stop to think. So when I say I was going through life blindly, I had goals and aspirations and I had direction. I was thoughtful in that respect, but I wasn't really thoughtful about if I was honoring the person that I was and the person that I want to be.
Wow. I was just sharing with the guests that left earlier about this kind of crossroads that I approached recently for myself. And, I think that I've always been really driven, and being driven to make a lot of money, I don't think is a bad thing, but I always felt guilty because my desire to make a lot of money, I didn't really
ever understand my purpose. You know, people would talk about purpose and, you know, if you find your purpose, the money will follow, all these cliches that you hear. And, you know, I was just sort of running 1,000 miles an hour. I didn't want to be broke. I grew up in a middle-class family, you know, but there were definitely moments that I remember pretty distinctly where it was like, I never want to have that be me or my kids. And so even though that drove me, there were some also things, you know, from my mom that drove me that kind of gave me a chip on my shoulder. But I always felt bad because I never really felt like I had a sense of purpose. And just recently that has changed. And so I feel like the work now that I'm doing is actually driven by purpose. And it's the most incredible feeling when you find that, because there's this element of surrender that happens where, you know, and we've been in a tumultuous industry over the last couple of years where it's like, you know, everybody's rich, everybody's broke. And, you know, and there's just this inner peace now that I have where it's like, I just somehow know it's all going to be okay. Despite the current circumstances. And it's an amazing place to operate from. So talk to us a little bit about how you came to find that.
Well, I want to catch something that you just said. You just said that I'm going to be okay. One of the other things that my therapist from Craig taught me when I would have these moments of like just utter despair. Hey, Julia, are your kids going to eat you for dinner tonight? I'm like, no. He's like, it's going to be okay. Like, really, what's the worst, you know, like run through that. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? And like run it out. It's not that bad.
And I think it's our own brain's design, right? To protect us. It's a survival mechanism where we want to avoid pain and gain pleasure, one of the two. And I think that like what I try to do anytime there's something bad happening, like sometimes it can be easy to ignore and to escape. And I've struggled with addiction my whole life. And so I know what it is like to want to escape without understanding what's causing me to want that. Yeah. And I think it's hard to explain to a lot of people, but nevertheless, I think being able to have the perspective that like no matter what goes down, if I'm able to pause long enough and see it from a perspective that maybe I don't even believe right now, but if I can get some perspective and distance and awareness around the situation, typically there's some peace in knowing that it is going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just our feelings.
Right. It's our feelings, and it's, you know, as I mentioned, I went through this phase where I was having these massive anxiety attacks as I was going through recovery. And I mean, to the point where like I had to pull my car off the road. I couldn't breathe. And again, sometimes I feel like I know this was me and I know this happened to me, but there is a sense of detachment that I sometimes feel around it because I am in such a good place now. But I did work really hard to get through some of that, right? I went to a place in Tennessee on site where they have, you know, centered living. I've done a lot of work into kind of Buddhism and meditation, and I've found some balance in how I can center myself. But I think we're all born with certain things, right? Like I'm thankful I've never had an issue with addiction. I've had an issue with anxiety. I also feel like I have somehow, I don't know if it's nurture or nature, right? If I was born with it or if it's my upbringing, but I have the tendency to see the glass as half full. So for instance, when they say, okay, you can't run, I'm like, can I go swim? It's never about what I can't do. It's about, there's still a ton of stuff that I can do. Even with some of the stuff I'm going through right now, I shared with you a little bit about my business. It's a little tumultuous. You know what? I got it better than so many people out there. Like, it's really not that bad. I get to drive home every day, and on my drive home, I drive around a corner and I get to see Mount Blue Sky, which used to be Mount Evans. Now it's Mount Blue Sky.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, right. Mount Evans, they renamed it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's Mount Blue Sky now. So I come around this corner and I see Mount Blue Sky, and you know, I go around that corner and I go, I get to live here. I get to do this every day. I get to, and I think if you can find even just a little way to start that, it becomes easier and easier to find that place where you can truly follow your heart, and the rewards will come, right? Like when I was a little bit younger, I used to think, how do people do that? Like I'm way too selfish to really want to do that. But I have come to realize, and maybe it is through, I got to a point where I was successful enough that I had enough money, I didn't have to really worry about it. And I get it. There are situations that until I've been in somebody's shoes, I'm not gonna pretend to know what you're going through. But at the same time, I feel like if you can picture the worst thing that can happen to you, could it be worse yet? Right? It could be. And I think if you can find the one thing, then it becomes easier to find 10 and 20 and 30 things.
So do you have because I'm so glad you brought this up, and I think gratitude is such an amazing, powerful state of mind to live in. There's a phenomenal book called The Magic. Rhonda Byrne is the author, and for anybody who has not read that book, you should go out and pick it up. And she basically walks you through these real stories that she's experienced in her life, but she happens to touch on everything you could possibly imagine would involve somebody's lifespan. So like health to money to relationships. And so she kind of touches on everything, and she actually gives you exercises to do that puts you in a state of gratitude where you're actually writing. I know we don't pay our mortgage with checks as much as we used to, but like the suggestion was writing on the check, thank you so much for for the roads and for the, like when you pay your tax bill, when you pay your mortgage, like actually doing something tangible to put you in a state of gratitude and shifting your perspective. And I'm a big believer in it. There's another book called The Gap and the Gain, where I'm not doing it justice, but the overarching theme, and at least my opinion of the overarching theme, is that everybody has the ability to understand anything that happens in their life from a place of gratitude that it's happening, even if it's horrific. And that book kind of helps you explore that.
I've read that one. I haven't read The Magic, but I've read The Gap and the Gain, and I do. I feel like that is part of how I am able to do that. And I would never have been able to put it to words like that, but I'm like, that's exactly what I do. I live in the gain, right? It's like always, I'm always living in the gain, because what's the other alternative? I mean, at the end of the day, happiness, right? I tell people, like, happiness is a choice. Do I really believe that? For me, yes. Were there times in my life where I didn't believe it? Absolutely. Right. So it's tough, but I think, so my therapist, when I was inpatient and then going home, he had me every night before you go to bed. I was having a lot of trouble sleeping, and that's really typical for especially type A women with a head injury, right? Like, you're not going home without
the head injury.
Well, yeah, right. So he was just 10 things, write 10 things that you're grateful for. And then one day he comes in, I give him my book, and he goes through, he goes, okay, you're not allowed to use chocolate or your children anymore. So it's probably the top 2 things on my list for chocolate and for my kids. Right? He's like, come on, like, your kid's what? That your kid can walk? You're great. Like, be specific, right? Get into it. What are you thankful for about your kids, right? Why? You're not just thankful for your kids, right?
That's such a good one. I think a lot of times people will write down, I'm grateful for the thing, but then that's where they leave it. And I think if you just go a step further and add on why you're grateful for that person or that thing, it helps you to feel the gratitude, not just think it. And I think that's the key with any sort of gratitude exercise.
Yeah, I agree. If you can put yourself in that space where you're like, I'm thankful for my son because he's indulging me in doing this grace with me this weekend, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Right. You've got people in your life that you're thankful for. And if you can grab that emotion, why am I thankful for chocolate? Because I can let it melt slowly in my mouth and enjoy the taste for a long time. Like, if you can put yourself in that space, great. You've just done it. If you're writing down things like, I'm thankful, and that's where I had gotten, I'm thankful for my kids, for chocolate, for, it was not
Like an exercise.
yeah. And so I think you have to get beyond the exercise of it, and it's just like honoring the intent and not the letter of the law, right? It's you've got to understand the intent behind it. And sometimes that does take presence, right? Like my husband and I now, I'm not actually remarried, but remarried. We act as husband and wife, even though we're not actually married. We have this, when he comes home every day, we look at each other in the eye. We don't just go, love you. You spend a minute. I'm here for you. I'm present. How was your day?
God, and it's so hard to, especially now in a society where everything is, technology is growing faster than we can even imagine. Everything is vying for our attention. It's really hard to find moments where you stay present. So is that how you guys do it? You just have this sort of pact where, every day you kind of commit to that period of time, or is there anything else you guys do to make sure you can connect and stay present?
Yeah, I mean, we've spent some time meditating together, and he, I think he had a relationship where he didn't feel appreciated and listened to, and it was all about, without even looking at you, I love you, goodbye, good hello. That doesn't make a person feel like you really are there for them. Sure. And I think that was the basis of our relationship. We were both at places in our lives where we were ready for that and could appreciate that, right? Mm-hmm. Not that I don't appreciate my ex-husband. He is a great man. He's still a good friend. After my bike accident, I really had trouble reconciling the direction that, where I found happiness and where he found happiness. And I was like, we don't have to compromise anymore, because that's not the direction. I can't look him in the eye and go, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what is important to me. Because the things that were important to me at that point, and I had changed so dramatically, so quickly, right? You go through something like that. And it's not like he couldn't keep up or whatever. It's just, you don't live. He lived through a different experience, which I'm sure was just as horrifying, right? He had a wife in the hospital, 2 young kids. Like, it was literally the day before school started that this happened. So he's got 2 small kids that he's trying to get to school the next day. They don't understand mom's in the hospital. The kids were like 7 and 8, right? He was in a really tough spot. And to understand, for him to understand not only what he was going through, but what I was going through. And at the time, I couldn't understand what he was going through, and I didn't care. I had 2 broken legs. I'm in a wheelchair. I've got a head injury, right? Like, I was so self-centered. And when I was able to come back around and go, okay, this is what's important to me, we had grown pretty far apart in what those importances were. So, yeah, it's a journey, right? And you appreciate every step of it. If you can look back and understand, sometimes you don't appreciate it in that moment. That's like I tell my kids when they make a mistake. I'm like, as long as you can look back and learn something from it, it's not really a mistake.
Totally. I think it's remarkable. And first of all, if your kids ever listen to this, they should know they have such an incredible mother. And, when you were going through, not just that moment in your life where you'd had the injuries happen, I'd be curious to know if your kids were sitting here and I asked them, hey, what is the life lesson you took away from what your mom went through during that time? What do you think they would say it was?
They would both answer that question very differently.
Okay.
My younger son recently graduated from Full Sail University. He's in music production. He just moved, and then he moved to Arkansas, and
phenomenal musician, by the way.
Yeah, and he's
awesome.
He's a great, very creative kid, right?
Uh-huh.
He's still developing the prefrontal cortex. When he came home after graduation, we had a couple of discussions, and he said, I felt like I wasn't, from the age of 9, I had to raise myself. And I was like, what? It's like, Max, let's just get one thing straight. Everything I did was intentional. That was part of my ex-husband and I growing apart. His idea of being a good dad, which he is a good dad, was to do everything for the kids. I said, my idea of being a good mom was to help you find the tools that you need to do things for yourself and to get those things that you want for yourself. So if you feel like I didn't raise you, it was because I wasn't the helicopter mom. I wasn't doing everything for you, but it wasn't because I wasn't here. Like, go back and think about that. And he came to me a couple days later and he was like, I didn't mean that, Mom. You're right.
And also it might be something that he discovers a few years, right? Like he might look back and go, wow, now I get it. Right?
I was so hard on my mom, Derek. Like, I can't even tell you how badly I feel like I damaged my relationship with my mom. And now we are really close again, but it took, God, I'm almost 50. It took how many years to get back there? And my son that's here in Colorado, he's at Western State. He, funny enough, very shortly after my bike accident, when he turned 10 years old, he wanted to start riding a road bike. And at 10 years old, he did the Denver Century, right? I was not even back on a bike at that point. I picked them up at the finish line. He rode it with his dad. And he rode 100 miles at 10. And he finishes, and do you know what he said to me? Mama, I'm going to register for the triple bypass. And I was like, oh, yeah. So that's 118 miles, starts in Evergreen, finishes in Vail. You go over 3. It's a huge bike thing. I'm like, Alex, I got on the website. I said, you have to be 12. 2 years later, he comes to me and he says, Mom, I want to do the triple bypass. I can register now. So we did it when he was 12. 12 years old, I rode the triple bypass with him. But I think he took out of it the perseverance piece, right? I think he took something very different. He is an endurance athlete through and through. He's both of my kids have different parts of both of us, but this one is definitely, he's the engineer and he is the endurance athlete. So he and I spend a lot of time together, mountain biking, backcountry skiing. When I say I ski a lot, I don't ride chairlifts that much anymore. I do a lot of backcountry skiing, and Alex, my 22-year-old, is my partner in crime for a lot of that. But I think he would say, you know, that he learned the perseverance through athleticism is, you know, I think a piece of what made me who I am.
That's awesome. How do you, what is your filter like with your kids? You know, because you had made the comment earlier about your parenting style. I'm not sure if those were the words you used, but you said, hey, I want them to be able to have the tools, so I don't want to do everything for them. But as a father, I can say that I have that same approach. Like, I want to be able to help them figure it out so that they can do it and be resourceful for themselves. But there's also a big part of me that's like, I just want to do it for them. And I'm curious, like, for you, what that filter looks like and how you decide, you know, when you're willing to step in versus not.
Yeah. And I think you've probably already learned this, right? You're going to do it different times all the time, and you're going to make mistakes. Sure. And you're going to, so how do you filter that? And how do you, I think a lot of it for me at first was getting frustrated, like recognizing that when my kids left their mittens at home, my husband would run them over to school. And I'm like, dude, let him. So first you have to recognize the issue, right? Yeah, and I'm like, I'm not driving his lunch over there. He'll go hungry today. And tomorrow he'll remember his lunch, right? So it starts with some cue that you think about. Just like when I had kids, like I didn't sit down and go, this is how I'm going to parent.
Sure.
And my younger son said to me, he moved in with his girlfriend, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this. But he was like, I'm going to be a different type of parent than you, Mom. I'm going to homeschool my kids. I'm like, that's great, Max. That's great. But let me tell you something. When that baby's born, it's not what you expect. Like you can't.
There's no way to prepare for it.
Right. It's just you have to make the parenting mistakes. You have to learn as you go. Every child is different. Like my kids, what they used to tell me, you know, well, Alex did this and he got this punishment. I did it and I got this punishment. I'm like, yeah, because he didn't do it intentionally. You did. You know, so the punishment has to fit the real crime here. Yeah. It's difficult to parent when you've got 2 different kids, 3 different kids, however many kids you decide to have. But it's also like part of the learning experience. And I don't think I appreciated that until I had kids, that my parents, I mean, as much as I adored my dad before, and I don't want to say hated my mom, but, you know, I always butted heads with my mom, probably because we're 2 type A driven, successful women, right? But it took me until my kids were, you know, until I understood that I was having difficulty learning how to parent my kids. And I was like, oh, my mom didn't always know what to do. Right?
Yeah, no, and I think too, like, people will oftentimes try to craft out this perfect plan, right? They'll do a bunch of research and they'll think, to contemplate, to evaluate, to reconsider, they'll do all the stuff, and then when the actual thing happens, it ends up being, very different. Were you somebody that would do a bunch of plan? Because I imagine, like, what you went to school for, and just that part of you is more of a planner and a researcher. But then in business, there is sort of, this procrastination element that you want to work on and get past. And, how did you normally approach a situation? Did you have the plan, or did you just do it and figure it out later?
Both, right? I mean, I am definitely a planner. I mean, to the point that my current husband is like, can we just think about today? But I think I also am an emotional person. So it doesn't matter when you get in a situation that you have a plan for. When you have an emotional interception there, you can't always follow the plan, right? Yeah. Or you forget about the plan completely, right? Sure. So I wouldn't say that until my bike accident, I don't think I had like a long-term, my children are going to be on the swim team. They're going to be like, I never did that. I will say I am thankful that neither one of them really, really wanted to do any like organized team sports. When I look at some of my friends and how they are slaves to getting their kids to these soccer tournaments and all this other stuff, I can't even imagine having to do that. My kids, I've got one that was they both played musical instruments. One that was really into biking and mountain biking, like from 3rd grade on, Alex rode his bike to school every day.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, at first, not so much in the winter, but by the time he was in middle school and high school, it didn't matter. There could be snow on the ground, and he's got a fat tire bike at that point, and he's going out he's riding. Like, he was really into these independent sports. And Max kind of wasn't into sports as much as he got more into music and he was doing some digital music. Neither one of them really got into that, but I don't think I had those expectations in my head. I made them join the swim team when I was coaching the swim team. And I think from coaching, I learned, like, seeing these parents that were clearly, the kids were only on the team because the parents wanted them there. And they were only doing these things because the parents had these dreams of their child being a famous baseball player or whatever. Maybe I didn't put my kids in enough opportunities. Like, I didn't ask them. I'm like, hey, let's go do this basketball camp. Max played basketball for a little while. I never shut a door, but I also maybe didn't open all the right ones. Who knows, right? It's hard. It's hard to find that balance.
Well, I think that turned out okay.
Yeah, I think they're both happy, and I think we have great relationships. That we're able to have those conversations where he says those things to me, and I'm not gonna, I'm like, I get it. Like, you're still developing up here. You're gonna feel a little differently in another year, but
yeah. It's an amazing transition, I feel like, because once you become a parent, I don't know when it happens exactly, but I feel like there's a moment where you begin to realize that so much of life is about perspective and patience, and timing too, right? And all right, 2 things I want to touch on. One is, you've had a very successful, you continue to have a successful career in real estate. So I want to touch on that a little bit. What is it that you think you do, just from an internal process standpoint, that has led to your success? Like, if you were to have to define it, or pick a couple of words to describe, this is sort of my guiding force that drives me to be great at what I do. Yeah. And then also, like, what would you say to somebody that right now maybe they just went through a horrific accident, or maybe they're sitting in a place where they're in a very bad place mentally, but they don't know how to get out of it, right? And they need to there's something tugging at them, like they know that they're capable of so much more, but they just feel stuck. Maybe they're a little depressed. Maybe they just don't know where to go from here.
Yeah. So I do some counseling around that. I've continued to volunteer
cool.
at Craig, and I actually now I volunteer with NSCD, which is National Sports Center for the Disabled. So I teach cross country ski lessons to disabled, whether it be mentally
That's awesome.
disabled. But there are a lot of ways that you can look at how to get out of that funk. In terms of entrepreneurship, right? I think a lot of what I learned in my engineering business, when I went to go back to the engineering business, it was like, first of all, think about what was going on in 97, right? 8 months later, after my bike accident, my ex-husband says, I think you need to look at the books. And the business was going under. I mean, it was clear. I needed another career. Then I proceeded through this divorce, and I'm like, I need a career where I can use my business skills, not the engineering skills so much maybe, but I have to say, like, with the math background, it really helps in real estate, but also just understanding why I succeeded when I opened my own engineering firm, right? Why was I able to grow? Because I treated my clients like clients. I felt in the previous engineering firms I worked for, the client was the enemy, the architect was the enemy, the builder was the enemy, and it had to be my way, right? That's why engineers are really difficult to work with. My way, and that's it. It's black and white, right? But I think if you can find the gray, but I also think I learned really good business practices. And like, you have to be professional in real estate. We see what's going on with this NAR lawsuit, right? And it's I think the people that are going to succeed through this are the people that have been doing their job the right way for years anyway.
Sure.
And I consider myself to be in that group. But I think what helped me find my way to real estate, I mean, I just had a good friend who, we were getting divorced. I said, come and look at my house. And he said to me, Julia, and I confided in him. I said, we're getting divorced. And at the time I had taken a job doing sales for a sporting goods company, right? Since I didn't have the engineering thing anymore, let me do something in sports. I was coaching. I was doing a lot of individual coaching for individual athletes for triathlons and endurance sports. And I was like, I really need a career. I'm going to be divorced. I'm going to have to support myself. And he said, you should look at real estate. And I looked at him and I said, I don't wear makeup and high heels. Like, I'm not that person. I'm not a salesperson. He's like, think about it. Come and meet some of the other people that I work with. And he was right? I think I wouldn't maybe be as successful in a more metropolitan setting, but part of what helps me succeed in what I do is, like, I love where I live, right? We talked about this. I go around the corner. Like, I love Evergreen. I love the mountain trail running. I love that when it snowed 4 feet the other day, I put on my skis right outside of my garage and I skied up and down the road. Like, it was, I love where I live. And am I being a salesperson to share that experience with other people? So if you can really believe in what you're doing, I love telling, and I've also come to regret the fact that I've shared so many of my favorite trails with so many people because they were my favorite trails, because usually I only saw one or two other people. Now I can't even find a parking spot, right? But that's my nature. Like, I want to share everything that I love. Like, I want you to experience that. Derek, come up to Evergreen. Let me show you the best places to go, right? So that's part of, I think, what helps you be successful is when you can really find what your passion is and share that love with someone else, right? A swim coach that was just a good swimmer but doesn't truly love swimming, they're not a good coach. They know the rules, they know how to teach, but they're not teaching that passion. When I was coaching swimming, one of the things I was teaching a lot of swim lessons, whenever I had parents that would come to me and be like, I was like, listen, my priority right here, this isn't the most competitive swim team. Go over here if that's what you want. But really, at the end of the day, swimming is a lifelong sport. And even when I was broken, I could do it, right? I had to patch up some stuff, and
sure.
But even when I was broken, I could get in the water and swim. If you can figure out how to get these kids to love it, I'm like, so if you want like really competitive, go someplace else, because that's not what I'm teaching you right here. When I was coaching triathlons, it was mostly with adults, and they were doing something for themselves, right? And I could also really appreciate that. But I think you have to first stop and think, why am I doing this? And if you're selling something that, it'd be like if you were a salesman for knives and you don't think these are the best knives in the world, you're not going to be a great salesman, Derek. It's just, you have to believe, I think you really have to believe in what you're doing to be good at it, whether it's sales or coaching or, no matter what it is.
There's something I'd like to add to that. I totally agree with you. I think that, and you can see the difference in somebody when they're treating what they are doing as a passion. Like, it's their passion, they love it, versus like a job where they've just got to show up and do it and they're going through the motions. Like, that's super evident. But I also think for the person that maybe hasn't found that passion, and maybe I'm just speaking to myself on this, my past self, but I think that it's really easy to get caught up and stuck in the thinking around what is my passion. And so then what happens is you end up putting off doing anything because you're so desperately trying to just find the passion. And I would argue that no, just do anything that's moving in the direction, even if you're not positive. And when you do that, more doors will open. You will start to think differently, and you may ultimately end up not in that job or that role or that position, but something else. But if you never would have started that in the first place, you may never end up finding your path. I mean, shit, I've been doing lending for over 20 years, right? And I'm just now finding my true purpose.
Yep.
It's amazing. But if I hadn't gone through the hitting my head against the wall, and not that I don't love what I do, but I was just, it was like I felt proud. I've always felt proud of what I'm doing because I'm giving the gift of home ownership, but there wasn't like a true purpose-driven component to it until, honestly, we started launching the podcast, because I'm like, man, I've struggled with mental health. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I think that a lot of other people hopefully can be helped by the guests that we have on here and from some of the stories they share. So thank you so much for coming down and coming on. And I never feel like there's enough time. Like, there's so many more things I feel like we could talk about. But thanks for sharing that. And hopefully you'll come back on.
I'm sure I will.
Really quick, where can people find you?
JuliaPurrington.com.
Cool.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah.
JuliaPurrington.com. What about social?
Yeah, I have. I definitely have Instagram and Facebook. I mean, Julia Purrington Realtor.
Julia Purrington Realtor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is my Facebook.
Good.
I will say I had hired somebody to help me with that stuff, because while I am really passionate about what I do, I struggle with pushing that message out on the social media platforms.
Yeah.
I'm too busy doing what I love to get on that.
I think most of us do, and nothing to feel bad about. But guys, go look her up if you're ever looking to buy real estate in Evergreen. She's a phenomenal agent. I can attest to it, and make sure you reach out to her.
Yeah.
Thank
or
you
if
so
you
much.
just want a backcountry tour guide in
Yeah,
the
that
foothills,
too.
anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to do that.
Cool.
Thanks, Derek.
Turn that loss to a check. Every time that I see a limit, what? I push right past it. Don't care if you got here first. The one to win is the last one standing. Say my life is like luck. Nah, I